This podcast is brought to you by AppsFlyer. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful, it's essential. Enter AppsFlyer, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With AppsFlyer, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they interact with your app. AppsFlyer, where your app's potential meets performance.
Welcome, everybody, to the Deconstructor of Fun podcast. I'm the host, and you're the guest. I got two guests today, which is rare. First time two guests in the same room. Joe Schaeppi, CEO of Solsten. Bastian Bergmann, COO of Solsten. Welcome.
Thank you, Mishka.
Thanks for having us.
So this is a surprise podcast. I didn't know that I was doing a podcast, but we're doing a podcast. And we got three very interesting topics. We're going to talk about where are we as a market today, and I think that's an interesting topic to cover with the two of you because you work with the biggest publishers in the world and some of the up-and-coming publishers on all the platforms, whether it's mobile, whether it's PC, whether it's console, you're working them, or whether it's Peloton. That's the that we can say that client. So even like gamification platforms, if you will. Then I wanted to talk about new game development. It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing because it's a huge problem. So everybody's talking about how they're going to get their new games out with all the changes that we're going to discuss. And it would be very interesting to hear how your clients have been able to do that because you have a very unique approach and more of a traditional approach, which is like everything new is well forgotten, and then you're like the that stuff. Yep. And then I wanted to end up with something high flying, which is not gonna mention anything, which is AI. You're like, what? No, AI, and that's again one of those topics that you're one of the first platforms that used AI before it was a buzzword to raise money.
Yep.
So it would be very interesting how you've been using AI and how some of your clients have been using AI and where do you see AI being utilized in the future. But let's go in. Where are we with the market cycle? I'll just say three things that I see affecting quite heavily. One is interest rates, which leads to higher level of, interest rates due to the higher level of inflation. And so when you have higher interest rates, you have less money, less capital being available, and that, of course, leads to things like investment freezes that we see a lot of startups having trouble raising more money, and they're usually sometimes a mid-development. They haven't gotten on the green. We see companies cutting down their costs because money has a price. And the second thing is, especially on the mobile market, we see privacy changes affecting the increase of CPI and through the limitations of targeting. And of course, that increase of CPI leads to some of the genres being destroyed, like hyper-casual, or the genres mainly, or the studios being transformed, because now we're talking about hybrid casual. Yep. And we're talking about hybrid casual just because they can't make enough money from ads to justify the installs. So they're increasing their retention so that they can monetize more, so they can put in-app purchases. That's essentially it. That's the whole business model change. But where are we in the market cycle, from your perspective as a partner for the biggest and the up-and-coming studios?
Do you want to start this one?
I'll let you start.
Okay. I think, part of it is something that I've never heard game companies talk about before, but you hear companies talk about it all the time outside of games. And it's this word change management. And I think that, when we're successful and we have a boom and we get reinforced by certain behaviors, so tracking and targeting is something that the gaming industry got better at than any other industry, hands down. And they had a lot of success at that. It got to the point where over 70% of apps in the App Store that were making money were games. Like, that's how good we got at that as an industry. The other thing is the amount of games. There was this period of time where I always use the Merge Dragons joke because it's like Merge games are popular, Dragons are popular, let's make Merge Dragons, and all of a sudden you're making $100 million. That was a reality just a few years ago. You could go and fill in gaps in the market and say, like, these things weren't there. That's done now. Like, our industry's been so good and successful at filling out the market with content that now, Netflix talks about like, content problems and discoverability issues. Like, and it's really not discoverability that's the problem. It's resonance. It's not that, I watched, I don't know, Frozen on Disney Plus, and now you should watch Frozen 2. Or now I want to find something similar to Frozen 2. It's at that time when you need to watch a movie and you're sitting down with the people around you, what actually is going to resonate with you. And I think there's that aspect. So there's the market aspect. And then there's also the thing that people forget, that economics are psychological. They're not, it's the reason modern economics started in the 1970s. And if you look at what we do today, there's a reason why we can't predict what's going to happen, because of human beings and how we behave. And we behave in very interesting ways. And I think a lot of game companies miss the fact that if we look pre-COVID, the boom that happened where people were playing games all the time, they're inside, what that did was it just completely raised the bar on experiential expectations. So the example I give is like, everybody's always, they had McDonald's, they love McDonald's, and now it's like they've had Michelin star restaurants, and then they have McDonald's again. They're like, didn't taste like it did when I was a kid, and they're like, it's so much, it's like, you put that Michelin star restaurant though, like that's actually real food. I'm a foodie now, I know what food is. Well, they're the same with games. They're going into games, and we measure this stuff across everything from hybrid, casual to MMOs. Like, you kind of name the gamut of companies that Solsten works with. It's all over the place. And one thing we've seen is focused attention has actually gone down over the last 2 years. So what's happening, and you can actually see this trend outside of gaming too, engagement rates are going down year over year. So attention used to be the currency of engagement, social media, TikTok, that new thing, that new event, that new stuff. And so live ops teams were able to rely on a lot of that. Now you have to rely on more long-term things like friendships, bonding, interesting experiences people can have, story, narrative. And these are things that the game industry wasn't even really like, it depending on who if you went to a Japanese developer, like, oh yeah, we do narrative. But yeah, you have 7-year game development cycles. Like, not your average company can think in that way. So that's been, I think, one of the major changes. And we haven't, the industry still thinks that McDonald's works. They're still working off of the psychological expectations of pre-COVID, but they're not realizing, this is another data point that we see. The majority of gamers now, because they've played a bunch of games, levels of long-term orientation are going up. So when they play a new game, they're trying it to say, is this something I can sink my teeth into? So your day 1 to day 7 retention metrics that you used to think were really important don't matter as much now, because they're willing to play till day 7 to see if they can actually sink their teeth into that world, because they've already been burned a couple times where they've played games. And like, we're seeing gamers like research actual studios now. They're going out beyond the IP of the game. Like, is this developer gonna, in 2 years from now,
can I talk to the manager?
So I don't know. It seems like,
no, it's I think what you're speaking to, you combine the fact that all these barriers of actually getting something in front of a person and having it work and resonate with them is much higher across the board, with the fact that, Mishka, you spoke to it, rising interest rates. Someone took the punch bowl away. That's effectively what happened. The last, during COVID, access to free money was great while it was free. We all knew that wasn't going to last. So the party's over to an extent. And to a degree, I mean, it's a personal opinion, I actually think it's healthy, because it forces people to be way more conscientious with the money that they have, because it's harder to get the capital. So you have to make sure it lasts longer and make really sound business decisions with it. So we went from this world where everyone and their mother wanted to make a video game. And it's like, I'm 18, I'm wherever, I've no experience, I'm going to make a game. Here's $5 million, go for it. Like, take my money because you're making a game. Now we're in this different reality where money has a price again. You have much higher barriers, much higher expectations that you actually have to meet, ideally, exceed a little bit on the consumer side. So that, we were in, this quote really stuck with me. We were at an event, one of our investors a couple weeks ago in Vegas at the summit. And there's a round table, and the topic was launching games, actually launching games in 2024, not building, launching. And I was at this table with 30 executives from Leslie was there, the guy that made Grand Theft Auto, and Ralph Koster was there too. He's one of the first people at Ultima Online. And the prompter for the roundtable was, so what's changed? And everyone's waiting and looking at each other, and Ralph raises his hand, and everyone pauses because Ralph has probably something important to say. And he goes, for me, what's changed? When I start a new game, day one, I think about the business model. And this is a guy who self-admittedly at that roundtable, his whole life, he's like, I've always wanted to build games because I was passionate about the project, and my creativity took me there. That was my guide my whole career. And he's like, but I can't operate off of that anymore because the reality is, yes, I need to have that passion to put in my best work, but I got to put food on the table too. That's what he said.
We should use that quote for Deconstructor of Fun.
There you go.
The whole thing is the business model for games. Shout out to Ralph Koster.
Yeah, legend.
You've heard of heroic labs by now, and we keep talking about them because in today's mature market, you need every edge to be successful. Rather than spending those precious company dollars on building game tech, focus on building your game and shipping it. Get into your players' hands faster and grow your community. Heroic Labs is battle-tested partner and friend of the podcast. Their tech enables you to be flexible, creative, and scale for success. Heroic Labs has your tech stack covered. Whether you're looking for a world-class back-end game server, an amazing game development framework, fantastic live ops tooling, or reliable mass scalability, Heroic Labs has solutions for all of these challenges. And it's not just us at Deconstructor of Fun praising Heroic Labs. The company works with some of the world's biggest publishers on many of the beloved games. Focus on your game, save a big chunk of cheese, and avoid tech risks with Heroic Labs. This podcast is brought to you by Data AI. Now, you're asking, didn't they get acquired by Sensor Tower? They did, and that's awesome. Here's why. Whether you loved using Data.ai or Sensor Tower, the combined company will offer customers even stronger and more detailed insights on the full digital customer journey. Exciting times lie ahead as Sensor Tower and Data AI join forces. Go to Data.ai or SensorTower.com and get on board with undeniably the best data partner in the business. Now, back to the episode.
Okay, I picked up three pretty big things. So one is marketability. So I think marketability was a big topic for the last 3-4 years, where it was almost the key metric. Like, what is your IPM? What is your CPI? What is your ROAS? And basically that made or broke the game. Like, everything evolved around marketability. But with these changes, especially the privacy changes, that metric is not the one metric to rule them all anymore.
No.
So now we're going a step back to like, hey, actually the product has to be pretty good as well. Like, you can't just market something and get people cheap, monetize them early on, sayonara, next one in, and McDonald's model. And then the second part was the economical changes. So, well, not economical, but more in the industry. So I've said the bar has been raised, and that has been happening in the games industry all the time. Though with the changes in marketability, I don't think it raised the bar on the product. It raised the bar on your marketing abilities, your data abilities, but we haven't had the focus on the product side as much as it's now back on.
Yep.
And the third part that you mentioned was the attention, the decrease in attention. That's an interesting part. Is that like across the board with all consumers?
Yeah.
Like, people just can't read books anymore?
Yep. Yeah, there's literally a study showing, like, with even kids, they gave them laptops or iPads, and they had them study for school on the iPads versus studying in the books. And even the bad students who read the books performed better on the test than the good students who read from iPads. So the thing about human beings, we're incredibly adaptable. So neurologically speaking, when you spend time on a device, like, your glucose runs out. If you look at focused attention, your glucose runs out of your brain in about 20 minutes of focused attention. So think about surgeons, for example. Like, that's focused attention.
Hopefully.
Glucose, the brain, yeah, hopefully. Glucose in the brain is an expensive organ. Yeah. So your body's always trying to save the energy from the brain. And so what our brains have learned to do, as we've gotten more content, more news feeds, as social media has gotten better at trying to control and command attention, our brains have also adapted and got smarter to not take in what's there and reduce focus attention when we're on digital platforms and digital devices.
And how do developers basically tackle this? I mean, decreasing attention is really dangerous, like as a species for us.
Well, and it's only applied to digital platforms.
Okay.
So our brains have learned that if we're going to be on a digital platform, by the end of the day, if we have the same focused attention that we had when we were playing Oregon Trail back in the day and kids or whatever, like it's just the brain has learned to recognize this is a device and my level of attention needs to decrease to preserve glucose in my brain so that when I go to bed at night I'm happier and things like that too. Like we're adapting to the world we're in. A lot of people have this idea that like, well, cavemen did this.
Yeah.
It's like, well, they were cavemen. Like, yes, we're the same species we were 200,000 years ago, but we're also really different in a lot of ways too. Like epigenetics, like we change. So given that, I think what's interesting is like, there's this thing called the biophilia effect, for example. So a book, it's called Your Brain on Nature, written by two medical doctors, a lot of really cool studies on that. But if you have like, for example, nature in your game and real nature, that's one way to get increased levels of focused attention, because when you're in nature, the brain feels safe, especially water. There's a reason why you can't walk anywhere in Disneyland without hearing or seeing water, because we feel safe when we're around water. So there's ways to increase focused attention by reducing the cognitive load of these experiences. Another is by actually understanding the value and personality and motivational framework of the person. So think about, when people say, I'm like an extroverted introvert. What do you mean? Well, what they mean is that when they're around their friends, they feel like they get energy. When they're not around their friends or at like a new event and it's a bunch of strangers, they're like, that was exhausting for me. Well, why was the friend part not exhausting? Lower cognitive load, brain's using less glucose. Why? Because you have value alignment. So when you go into a room and like the three of us have some values I know that, are aligned on,
We discussed those.
Yeah. And what that does is it reduces your brain's load to use glucose. So if you design your game, like, so for example, we were talking about like NFL Rivals. That game, if you look at that audience, one of the interesting things about people that like the NFL in general, one of their top values is leadership. And so is it because, do people like Tom Brady and this, do they help increase that value, or do they, people that have that value, they're attracted to games like football because there's a quarterback and there's a clear sort of leader of the group. It's a chicken and egg problem, doesn't matter. But if that's a strong value for you, and if you know that about your gaming audience and you can design to those values, because people spend money and time on what they value. And from a cognitive perspective, it's very easy for us to interact with what we value. So when you understand the values of your audience, you can reduce cognitive load, increase focus attention. So what's transitioning is, and this happens to any industry that gets hyper competitive. So think of like tailors in New York. If back in the day when it was, a lot of people go, why are American shirts so, Americans wear shirts that are all like bulky. It's like, what's wrong with you guys? It's like, well, Europeans didn't have as much money back in the day, so you would make shirts tailored to begin with. When America was wealthy, you went and got that thing tailored. And then America kind of got off the rocker a little bit, and everyone just thought you buy these boxy shirts.
And then you fill them up.
And then you fill them up and fill them in. And the thing is, though, so when things get really competitive, you were a tailor back then. You wanted to be the best tailor. What were you going to do? You were going to understand your customer and audience like better than the other tailors. Like if I know John and this is what John does, like he's a politician and this is what he does for work. This is what he values. This is who he is. These are his favorite colors. I'm going to crush all the other tailors. And the thing is we've had such a blue ocean in this gaming industry to go in like create and be creative, where like you could even look at some fashion from like the 1800s. You're like, people wore that? It's like, yeah, because some creative created something and there just wasn't that many other options, and that made them look different than the peasants or something like that. Well, now people have so many options in games, just like if you look at any industry that booms. So really, if you want to reduce cognitive load and increase focused attention, one of the best ways to do it is to build a world that is in that person's reality, so to speak, to an extent. And that's what a lot of game companies don't do. They're like, we use Bartle types, or we made up personas, or we, the behavioral one's the funniest one. Like, we use, I'm not going to name the names of the companies, but, these are completionists or these are adventurers. it's like that's not who they are. You looked at behavioral categories in your game, like we're in this space right now. It's not like we're podcasters. Like that's not who you are. It's something you do. And what you talk about and what you do in that is related to your personality, your values, your cognition, all these other things that are uniquely you. And so by focusing on those things, you can actually create an experience that's interesting.
Can you go to like a concrete example? I know you work with Mainframe, so that's like an out of Iceland and Helsinki and now Paris as well. It's one of those like big up and coming MMOs. Very rare for a startup to do an MMO. But I think those are the type of games where understanding your audience is very important. So I know you work with them. I would like to have like a concrete example of how do you find that value alignment and what features, what work does it help to decrease that cognitive load to allow players to get into such a big game?
Yeah. So I can speak to two specific things, and I'll start actually with a marketing and brand positioning example, because that's where it all starts. Like, how do we actually communicate to players out there to differentiate ourselves and kind of like create that promise or show that promise that's going to resonate with the right people that we want to bring in. I don't know if you've seen the gameplay trailer that they launched a couple.
I saw it all the way from the first seed deck.
So when you watch that trailer and you get to the outro screen, I forget the exact wording, but it's something along the lines of a place where you can build a home. That didn't happen by accident. When you actually, and we've been working with them for 3 years, from literally the beginning through...
From the first seed deck.
From the first seed deck,
exactly. With the dragon fight and everything. Yes.
Exactly. So when you look at, they dissected the market in two broader categories, so to speak. MMOs, sandbox RPGs, and trying to find where's the overlap between those where Eve meets Valheim, and we're trying to carve out that unique space for us. That was, I'm drastically oversimplifying, but that was kind of what they were going after.
It's easy to understand. It meets Valheim. That's
Exactly.
actually a good pitch.
There you go.
I'll be like, got it.
There you go. So you're welcome. And when we started to focus in on what is the 2-3 most interesting, most valuable personas in that entire space, one of the things that was consistent across those 3 different groups was they were all very high from a percentile perspective compared to the rest of the gaming population in lacking purpose and seeking purpose in life and really valuing. So they were really after, they needed that anchor in life. They needed that meaning. They were looking for that purpose. So we were talking to the team about that, and the marketing team, that's the team that's based in Paris. Eric's leading that group. It's a phenomenal team. And they took that, and we started having these conversations, and you go, well, what's more fundamentally human in terms of giving a human being purpose than the idea of a home, your in-group, your tribe?
Just the word home.
Exactly. So that's where they have 4 core brand pillars. Every single one directly aligns with a core psychological attribute of the core personas in that market that they're after, that they designed to. And it's no coincidence that their early access group it's close to like 185,000 people registered for that game. And over 70% of them, we actually did short assessments called a typing tool. It's effectively a subset of the big psychological assessment that we run that allows us to understand how do these people line up with the personas that you've been trying to build and design to this whole time.
It's like a Harry Potter sorting hat for any audience. So you can have your market audience, and then we can put our sorting hat in there and know, hey, yeah, are these even a part of
exactly
the Valheim meets Eve meets
exactly. And I think it's just over 70% of the 185,000 people perfectly match to the one absolute ideal persona that they're after. So that's where they just did their open alpha. It was trending, I think, number 7 on Twitch or something and the reviews are really, really good, and there's gravitational pull towards what they've created, and that initial very organic uptick in the reviews that are coming out from broader streamers and players that are playing it. It's not a coincidence that people are liking it, because it was that whole thought process was so anchored in this is exactly the person that we're making it for. And to your point, they designed to those very specific core values from pretty much day one.
Yeah, so from the first time user experience, and it's really a blended experience from trailer to marketing to your Fatui, it should be a journey, and you're taking that person through a journey based on who they are, and that's what we call resonance. And that's what the outside people talk about relevance. Like relevance doesn't work. You can go on Amazon, you go on Instagram, you can learn about relevance all day. Like, oh, you just did this, do you want to buy this? Yeah, I literally just bought that, or I just did that. Like I don't need I just had that experience. That's relevance. Resonance is highly dependent on understanding the person. Like you can't have a dinner with your spouse or your best friend that's like, wow, like I would love to do that again, without understanding who they are. You can't. You just fundamentally can't do it. And so, if we look at game designers today, there was this world of like, I'm a genius. I'm a creative genius. I call them like Moses designers because they go to the burning bush and whatever they did at the burning bush, it's their ritual.
They bring the design document.
Here's the tablets.
Yeah.
And let's do this.
Yes.
And it's like, I used to ski a lot professionally. And when you go off like a big cliff, it's kind of like the same thing. It's like, but you can probe the snow before you do it. You can look at the depth. You can do this. Well, the last 4 years, we've had people just jumping off cliffs. We got this. And then it's like, it's almost like we looked at it as a consequence of the industry. Like, oh, games just fail. And the reality now is back to our first conversation on economics, capital. Games can't just fail anymore. It's like, I always would look at like these creative teams. I'm like, there's two massive casualties happen. One is the loss of creativity. Like you guys are some of the most brilliant, imaginative, creative people in the world. And you just spent 3 years to 5 years of your life and you just threw it down the toilet. I'm sure everyone learned some stuff, but from a societal perspective, that sucks. Like your art, your creativity could actually been going into the world. And then from a business perspective, I think what's interesting too is we lived in this world before where, and I think, you brought this up related to the mainframe earlier, where, you had a buddy who was like, I played it and it just it wasn't enough for me to keep coming back. It wasn't for me. Well, good. And that's part of why we use these like typing tools is we literally had an executive at a game company who did it. And he was the persona that only had a market size of 1 million people so he was in the market for the game, but he's like, oh, I play all these games. And he was like, this was a really good head check for me because I read through the traits of that persona. It was like, yeah, this is me. And he's like, so when I'm giving my thoughts and opinions on the game, I'm literally pushing our game into a smaller market segment. And it's like, think about it. You're the CEO of a game company and you've been really successful. How many people in the world are there like you? And so when you look at, for them knowing, hey, we're designing to our audience, to the group of people that this is going to resonate with. And I think that's happened a lot where executives who have been successful in some extent come in and say, well, I don't like this this mirror, and I don't like this driving wheel, and I don't like this car seat. And it's like, yeah, but it's a Honda. And it's like, do you buy Hondas? Do you like Hondas? They're like, no. And it's, well, then your opinions don't matter. And so I think that part is a really important aspect of this. So when we look at that journey from day one, it's not about, does it resonate? Maybe it's not for you. But does it resonate with the people that are part of the biggest part of the market, that have the biggest opportunity that's there? And the answer with, what they're doing and what we're able to see from the data, like when we do play testing with them, we can see the different personas from the play test. So we can see like, hey, persona 3, like usability was like, it was okay for them, but persona like 1 and 2, it was great, for example. And persona 1 and 2 are the biggest part of your market with the highest engagement so in the past, like back when I was at Big Fish, we do play testing and we go, hey, this feature worked really well for some people, but not really well for others. So it was okay. When in reality, it might have actually been a really good feature because it worked really well for our ideal customer profile, but not for our non. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty interesting.
If I can just, before I forget my point. So, that's an interesting thing that you mentioned with the resonance, and then you talk about audience size and probably audience value as well. Because a lot of the times when I talk to executives now, with all the changes in the privacy, I don't get lost with which way to pronounce this anymore. But with all those changes, they're talking about that we need to make a game that is more fitting for a broader audience.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is like, no,
That's the dumbest thing you can do.
still need to make a game for a specific audience.
Show me one company that's done the broader audience thing. Show me one game that has succeeded doing that.
Yeah. Well, they do anecdotal examples of like, well, Candy Crush is played by millions and millions of people.
That's the dumbest shit ever.
Yeah.
Like, Candy Crush was made for Facebook mobile players in a really niche space. If you look at Fortnite was so niche when it started. And if, a friend who's a game designer at Nintendo, he used this example for me a while. He's like made a ton of games in his career. He said, we get this like instinct. We see this big fire and all these people are standing around this big fire. And we're like, we want to go by that fire too, because that's where we'll get heat and warmth. Only to realize when we get there that we're standing quite far away from the fire because there's a crowd there. So what's the best thing to do? Well, go figure out where to make your own little fire. And before you know it, there's going to be a crowd, and then people start coming around, and all of a sudden, like, people are copying you. And so, and that's the whole point is the change management. Like, the psychology of what people were reinforced to do to win for the last 5 years is not correct anymore. And there still might be one or two people that still like squeak through. It's like, Indiana Jones when like the doors closing, they're like, but it worked for them, because you want to reinforce your own biases.
Yeah.
And our brain is built off of survival. So if you have like high dopamine experiences and you get a lot of money, like you were a part of that Candy Crush team, or you were a part of, and then now you go and your brain is wired towards survival. So your brain is literally wired to think that you should keep doing that.
Yeah. And I think it's just an important point to raise, because that's what I've been hearing. Like, the two things that I've been hearing from executives is like, well, we just need to make games that are appealing for broad audiences, no more niche. And then the second one, because we can't target niche. And the second one is, let's just bring in IP. Let's just slap it on top of it.
Well,
that way we can get the audience, and then we lower the bar, and they're more accepting in the beginning of the game, so we get them into the game.
And I've heard executives say that too. And what they don't realize, if they actually wrote out those two sentences, they would realize they're directly contradicting each other. And what's cool about IP is when you have good IP, you've actually pre-established a value connection. So let's take, for example, Monopoly. Like we work with Monopoly Solitaire. That was one of the early games where they came to us like, hey, we make Solitaire. We're one of the biggest Solitaire games. Like, we're trying to find IP fits. Monopoly was the second highest resonating IP with people that play Solitaire. And that was an IP they had access to. Well, so when we say resonating, like, these are people that have said, out of all the IPs in the world, Monopoly is one of my top 3. So these are like Monopoly people. If you play Monopoly and you've been playing Monopoly for a long time, there's a value set that is in Monopoly that you resonate with. So it goes back to our cognitive load and focused attention perspective. Like, think of a brand that you really like. If you see it, you're going to look over at it. You're going to be, and why? Like, so like if I think of brands that I love, like I love DPS skis. I have a value connection that is both from a brand perspective and experiential. And I'm not being paid by them or anything.
I don't think many who listen to this know even what you're talking about.
They're great. That's good. They're great. They're great skis. But the point is, like, and so that's a perfect example. Most people who would hear that, they're going to feel nothing from it. When I hear that, I think of powder. I think of all the great times I've had in the snow. I think of what they feel like compared to other skis, and then the values associated with that: freedom, creativity, athleticism, all these things that are important to me and my life, and the vitality and the vivaciousness. These are values, so I feel that. So Monopoly, like, we're talking Monopoly people. So you're that's what you're doing. You're directly targeting a value set of people that is pre-existing. So IP is not a hack. It's not. It's beautiful in terms of its ability to do that. And I think the opposite model, like the Clash of Clans sort of model of like, we're going to create a theme and art style that when you see it, it's branded. This is probably Supercell when you see that. Like, that is an amazing effort, and it works too. Like, I'm sure if you did the same thing I'm talking about with Supercell art and characters, there's a brand there. You would actually hear people say some similar stuff, but that's a long journey. It takes a lot of time to like brand something where people are going to start to feel stuff. And maybe like a good example of that is there's a study where they had people do a bunch of creative tasks, and they counted like how, divergent thinking, like how many creative ideas are you able to come up with? And they put different logos in the room, and they didn't tell people the logos that were in the room. So they put like IBM, other random logos, Apple logo, far outperformed any others in terms of the amount of ideas that people generated. And no one was told that the Apple logo was there. And so brands, like in another good example, I mean, everyone knows, the Coca-Cola and Pepsi test, but most people don't know the actual study. Like, so when they block them out and just put them next to each other, and you look at the brain under Pepsi actually is way more active than under Coca-Cola. So Pepsi, from a neurological perspective, looks like it's better to people, and it is. Like under the blind taste, and Pepsi people go, yeah, in blind taste tests, Pepsi is better. It's like, because you don't understand the power of brand. And so when you introduce the Coca-Cola brand, something really interesting happens in the brain. This is the Huberman part, right? The pre-medial part of your frontal cortex. So the pre-medial part of your frontal cortex in your brain, that's the part of your brain that really processes nostalgia, which is a very powerful emotion. And so like those Coca-Cola commercials around Christmas, those weren't a mistake. That wasn't like, and this goes back to advertising in games and how little, like, you guys, big brands have been really thinking through this. And there's a reason why Coca-Cola, when, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, rest in peace, when they go and invest and they go, who do you like? He's like, Coca-Cola. Why? Well, let's go full circle. Inflation. When inflation goes up, you can raise a can of a Coke with the rate of inflation and nobody blinks an eye. You do it with a SaaS company like us, people go, what? You just raise your prices by 13%?
What do you think, you're Coca-Cola or something?
Exactly. So where I'm going with this is, though, when you have that nostalgia moment, that brand, when people see Coca-Cola, the taste actually changes, and the taste is better than Pepsi. And when you go to Coke drinkers, does Coke or Pepsi taste better? They'll tell you in a second, Coke. Yeah. And so the brand, the IP, is a direct audience. Full stop. It's a niche audience that then allows you like to expand. When we worked with I'd like to say it, but we don't have a clearance for it. It's a really big IP. It was a game, and this is kind of funny story.
Does it have guns?
There's no guns.
Interesting.
Okay. But we had a person from another big company basically say, oh yeah, we know all about those users. Like, we study them and everything. And I'm like, tell me about them. And he started, and I said, because we've psychologically assessed this whole audience. And I'm like, everything you're saying is wrong. I'm like, let me guess. Because they had a competitor game from a mechanic perspective. I'm like, let me guess. You sent out a bunch of surveys to people in your game and asking them if they played that game. And you're like, yeah, that's exactly what we did. I'm like, what if I told you that 95% of their DAU are net new gamers? They've literally never played video games before. So you, maybe the 5% that have, probably play your game too, the competitor game. But you're looking at 5% of that game, and that's what that IP did. It brought in net new people who had a lot of affinity with that IP. And then if you ask those people, hey, are you a gamer? Even though they're playing like 3 hours a day on this game, they're like, no. But if you say, are you a fan of that IP? Absolutely. So a niche audience. And then from there, you can, this back to the fire. They created a new fire, or they brought a pre-existing fire out here and brought it in.
I have Mariah Carey in my head now. Holidays, Coca-Cola. I can't tune it out.
She's making bank right now.
Yep,
Every
it's
time
Mariah
this year,
Carey.
she gets Christmas time.
Step into the future of game monetization with Xsolla. Xsolla empowers developers and publishers to market, sell, connect, and optimize their games globally. From payment solution to a full suite of tools designed to grow your game's revenue while fostering a loyal player base. Xsolla is your game's gateway to worldwide success. With Xsolla, the world is your playground. Visit xsolla.com today and find all the solutions that will help you to power your games into success everywhere.
Another point that I kind of wrote here is, I think you were talking about failing fast. That's sort of a lean startup methodology. And I've been reading about it. I think that book came after the .com crash, where it's just like let's go cheaper, let's go faster, let's find out market fit with as early a product as possible, like the MVP. And I think that time, and if you push companies to do that, is wrong, because what you're essentially measuring is how good is this MVP compared to what is in the market. And you're talking about like, hey, you need to understand the players. The bar has been raised, the attention levels have been raised, and I feel like the companies need to be much more deliberate rather than chasing whatever KPI every different VC will say, or every different executive. It's like, well, the D7 has to be this. Well, the ROAS has to be that. Well, the K factor is actually really important, so that has to be that. So rather having a very, very deliberate approach and not chasing like how fast can I fail, because that's you should not fail. That's not the goal of your startup. You should succeed.
In a and this is like if you look at biological species, K versus R selection, bees versus elephants. Like, how many do you produce? Elephants don't have a lot of chances to survive, so they're going to have less offspring. They're going to teach their offspring. They're going to be very diligent about it. The fail fast model works in big blue oceans. So when the .com era was new, that's a brilliant strategy. When you take that strategy and try to fit it into a mature market, which, the gaming market, people, is maturing. And so when you try
declining a little bit, so that's like above maturity.
Yeah, so it's maturing, and so look at how Swiss people do stuff. Yeah. That's so watches, been around forever. When they go make a watch, it's not fail fast. It's who are our buyers? How many of these people are out, and how do we get it's direct mail marketing, it's direct marketing. They know that we probably have about 50,000 people in the world that are going to buy this watch, but we need to make it for those 50,000 people, and we need to get all 50,000 people of them to buy that watch, and there's a lot of money in that, and so that's kind of what's happening in gaming right now, is that fail fast model. That was like, and back to people being psychologically reinforced based on success. Our brain is wired around that. And it's the same reason like B.F. Skinner came up with behavioral psychology. Till the day he died, till he was 95 years old. He denied that cognitive psychology was efficacious in any way, even though the amount of research was astounding. But the amount of work he had to do to go from like Freudian dream world to convince people that, behavioral psychology is real, he had to do so much work that he just believed it so much, and he had so much success from it that was a part of his identity. So like, we've seen people at companies we worked with, they come in there like, we got this new UA guy. He was the top UA guy at insert name of company that spent hundreds of millions or billions of dollars on UA in the height of targeting and tracking. And then now it's 2 years later. How's that person doing? Oh, they're gone now. Why did it take, what happened? Why did it take so long? Like, well, they weren't performing. Well, because they're stuck in a success pattern from before. And most people, change management, cognitive adaptability, neurogenesis, these are hard things. Like, if you look at when neurogenesis happens and synapses form, like neuronal clusters, the older we get and the more success we have, so these things become like super highways. Little kids, it's like dirt roads. So if you want to move a dirt road from here to here, their brains are amazing. Like, you can go from a behavior that was bad, you guys both know, to a behavior that's good. You can change that relatively easy. But it's why they say you can't teach old dogs new tricks. Yeah. If you go from most like people who've had either older or have had a lot of success at one thing, it's the same reason why the more educated people, like if you have like PhDs or 2 PhDs, you're more likely to have more cognitive biases too. There's research that you can look it up on that. And so now you have a super highway like B.F. Skinner did, and to move that highway from here, there's a lot of machinery that's involved to get this from here to here. So it's like, you can't just change that success pattern overnight. And that's what we're going through as a whole industry. So there's going to be younger companies or more cognitively flexible people that are literally and are right now killing it. Like, that's what Mythical's the number 1 to number 9 top grossing game, the NFL Rivals game. And I was at this Web3 conference yesterday. I was speaking at, they're all talking about Web3 games. I get on stage, I'm like, no one's brought up the fact that there's a Web3 game on the App Store, and everyone's talking about the future of gaming. And I'm like, there's a Web3 game on the App Store that's a top grossing game right now in sports. And it's been so since October. Like, why are you guys not talking about that? Like, and no one wanted, it's like I said it and no one heard it. Because in their brain, you can't put Web3 games on the App Store, but Mythical did. And so I think it's weird when it's like I'll stop after this, but like the natives, in the United States, when the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria came, their stories how they couldn't even see them. Like they saw the water, the wake moving. So like that's a really weird wave. Like it's this V-shaped wave. And obviously none of us are there, so we can't confirm. But these stories proliferated, and how the story goes is a kid went out there and started describing the ship and the shape of it, and then they could start to see it. Our brains are wired to protect us. So like if an alien ship was in the air, we probably wouldn't even see it because our brain probably couldn't wrap a little kid might though, because they're cognitively flexible enough to go, hey, and then they might be able to describe it to us dumb adults. And then we're like, oh yeah, I see it now.
It took us how many minutes till we got to aliens? 45. It's like, it's not that. And we already crossed Huberman, so it's going well.
There's maybe just quickly there, one of the so to speak pathways or roads that would need like repaving or needs to be moved when you bring it really down to an organizational level in the studios and different teams working together, the sooner and the more marketing and product, not to make this political, but reach across the aisle and actually work on the same team, anchored in a unified understanding of this is the audience or this is what we're going after, and they're both playing on the same team. Because you spoke to this earlier, and I think it's a really, really important point. When you put a creative, a brand promise, what you're creating for your new game out there in front of people, and you're bringing people in back to launching all those early KPIs, marketability testing, CPIs are up, all this stuff. The game needs to be in a position to live up to the brand promise that's being created. Otherwise, you bring players in, they play for a couple of days and go, nah.
Yeah.
That wasn't what I was being promised, so to speak.
That was like the thing with Monopoly Solitaire.
Exactly.
That almost bombed because the team, like part of the team, really had this set idea on what the game should be. Like they're like, how much Monopoly, how much Solitaire. So Zach Pond, who's their VP of marketing, and this goes exactly to marketing and game teams playing together. And because there's some people that think you shouldn't do that. But they need to play together to really get that first-time user experience and that brand promise correctly. He just said, okay, how about this? We make one prototype off of the audience, the Monopoly Solitaire people, and then we make one off of the Moses, the tablets, you know? And we test them against the audience, and we see. The one that was based off the audience crushed it compared to... And that's the one. It's their second grossing game, highest grossing game that they have now, and that's a clear story of. It actually was interesting. One of the game designers on the team, like he went from being like, okay, I see that now, and the next game that they made, he's like, I made like 17 games in my career. I actually like when I had to make major decisions, I could see their psychology. I could go back at night. I could do my tablet thing, but what I had with me then was who they are and who like, as people. And then I could come back and he's like, we designed that game like how much faster?
9 months faster.
9 months faster than the average game. Because he's like, and with 9 months faster with early retention and engagement metrics that were like really good, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's just that like you have to deliver on that brand promise.
Because otherwise, it's what you were speaking to back to the fail fast analogy, right? If you don't do that, marketing might be doing a really good job. They're bringing in great people. The game can't hold them. Retention is nah. And then the game team goes, hey, marketing, bring in better people. And classic. Right now in that environment, marketing says, well, not going to get a lot better than that. we're trying, and it's brutal out there. So they're going to bring that in. Then the game team says, well, the marketing team says, well, can you fix the game? And you end up with he said, she said, and everyone's just pointing fingers at each other. So that's a surefire way of setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, that's quite typical with the with more siloed organizations, whether they're games or apps or anything with those type of things. But I think with the deliberate part, I feel like a lot of startups have been pushed towards that lean startup method, and I don't think it's just a good method to have with. Like, we haven't had it for a long time compared to other type of companies that we've had throughout any industry. Nobody starts a car company saying like, just fail fast, just like see what works and like what crashes and burns, and then we'll just go and iterate across and pivot to different type of vehicles. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like we make the first car, and the first car is for the first segment, and this is the most valuable segment, and we're going to start with a sports car. We're going to start with a pickup truck because we believe it, and we have to make that pickup truck work in order to do other ones. There's not like, we're going to fail with the pickup truck, and then we're going to do the motorcycle. It's like, what are you talking about? People are just going to remember the horrible pickup truck that failed.
Yep. And I think it's why, like, companies like the Mainframe, like Everywhere. I just talked to this guy from Avalon. These are big MMO games. These are kind of like, attempts at, the true metaverse type stuff. But the market opportunity there, it's something like, if you ask Citibank, I think it's the metaverse is going to be like worth about $12 trillion by whatever. McKinsey said 5 trillion.
Gotta believe McKinsey.
ChatGPT said 12. So whoever you want to trust there. How ChatGPT split the difference between the data from those two. Why did they give more weight to Citibank than McKinsey? But what they mean by that, they don't mean like it's this like, Oasis game that's going to make that much money. What they mean is like the Chipotle example you were giving at breakfast. And I think that's worth bringing up because these are new oceans to make money and grow. And I think that a lot of people that are still stuck in the old way of thinking and the, whether it's, fail fast or this sort of stuff, it's like, that's a blue ocean market. Yeah. That's like, we're in a red ocean market now, but and this is, everything's a caterpillar. Life is traffic. If you don't have a heartbeat, you're dead. Like, if we look at games, emotions in games, people are like, oh, we have all this positive sentiment. I'm like, do you have negative sentiment too? They're like, no. I'm like, well, that's a bad game. Like, what we see is with sentiment, when there's positive sentiment and negative sentiment, that means the person cares. If you are only in your relationship all positive all the time, you don't really actually care. And so, I think like what's happening is, teams are going to have to reframe how they think about experience and how they think about quality and how they think about creating and crafting and really being, and both from a marketing perspective, because that's the other part that, we were talking a little bit about before this. There's just game companies got better than any other industry at targeting and tracking. And when that got taken away, it's like, you guys literally forgot how to actually do advertising. Any other industry, make creatives, it's need-based, you understand your market, you invest in that. It's not, let's make 50,000 creatives and A/B test them. If they're all junk, like some of the best performing ads that you do see today from game companies, they're ones that investment went into.
Yeah, well, that's the lean startup method. Just throw stuff on the wall that is as fast as possible, and then find what works, and then follow that.
Which works in a blue ocean, like a very, very big blue ocean.
Maybe.
It did for Silicon Valley. It's like a lot of, because when you think about that was the first .com bubble and the second one. Like, if you look at the first .com bubble, there's not an online calendar. There's not an online calculator. Like, if you talk to like these guys, a lot of those guys, companies got bought by Apple and
But that's
IBM
even deliberate. Like, the most non-deliberate is like, let's try calculator. And then at the moment when it's not showing traction because it's not finished and you're testing it, just pivot to something else. Dog food. It's like, why? Because like, Bastian had a good idea. Let's just jump there, chase that for 3 months, then pivot because we never finished that idea. We didn't find the early traction, and so we're going to jump to the next thing.
Which in a blue ocean, you're going to land on gold if you do that. Because there's so much gold out there. It's like if you're a miner and you were the first to Colorado, and it's like, go hammer at that rock, go hammer at, oh, there's no gold. You're eventually going to hit an ore vein that's so shallow that you're going to find gold. If you go to Colorado now and try to do that, you're not going to find any gold. No. Is there still gold in Colorado? Probably. But it's like, you got to buy that plot of land. You got to really invest in like technology, where to dig.
And through that, we are seeing companies that have a more deliberate, tenacious, whatever you want to put it, approach, like Scopely. that is very focused on like we're gonna make this game work, and it doesn't matter how many times we have to pivot inside that game, inside this thesis. We can change the details of this thesis. Maybe the core game is not functioning correctly, but we are gonna make this game with this IP, with this element, with that, and kind of like making it work rather than at the first sign of weakness, we're just gonna abandon it and start from the beginning at something totally new. So it's like playing a game of musical chairs, and now just there's no music playing. So it's like you just don't have time to switch between chairs.
Yep, exactly. Matt Strite, he used to be the director of research at Scopely. Like he's one of our directors of products now. And if you ask him, if you listen to him talk about all that methodology and really focusing on audience, the player, I mean, they've been doing that for a while. And there's a reason why Matt's at Solsten. And it's the next generation of how you actually are doing that and ensuring that those outcomes take place. And Scopely, I think, has earned the right to be able to do that too. It's like you got to get good at it. Yeah. So you're probably going to have, and that's the thing. Like with failure, it's only failure. I mean, true failure if you didn't learn anything. And so that's why I see like when game companies keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's like you're going to fail again with the other IP. You're doing the same thing over and over again. Like figure out how to get good at this thing. And it's like, you think of other traditional industries. Like, okay, I'm going to stick with skiing maybe because skis have been made for a very long time.
Because it's a very broad topic for many listeners.
Yeah, that's why we're doing
Everybody understands skiing.
Of course.
Are we talking cross country or downhill?
We're talking downhill right now.
Let's go in more niche.
And so you ski and you make skis. You're not like, oh, like let me make pencils. Which actually, Bic, the pencil company, like they're also one of the biggest windsurfer producers.
And razors and
they're not. Did they make it in windsurfing? No, they needed to stick to pencils.
Yeah.
But it's like I think there's this tendency to you want to really nail a certain industry or certain product. Like I've seen game teams. Well, even back when I was at Big Fish, we made solitaire games, we made casino games, we made hidden object games. We were really good at those things. And then Clash Clans came out, all these sort of, I don't know, Game of War type games. We're like, oh, they're making a lot of money. Let's make them.
It looks simple.
Do you know any Big Fish games that, no, because they didn't work.
Yeah.
It's like, hey guys, what are we good at? And let's think about how we develop and hone that skill and really dial that in. And I think that's very powerful when you know who you are.
All right, I want to cap this conversation. We talked basically about what the market is, how do you approach new game development, and I want to kind of cap it off with something that is tied to both, and that's, of course, AI, a hot topic. And I think from my perspective, AI is essentially a way to be more efficient as a company and as a team, and efficiency is especially needed because that's how economy grows. You produce more with less. That's what efficiency is. So I'm very curious like how does Solsten has been using AI pretty much since the beginning, and how do you see the studios that you work with utilizing AI? Because you work not only with the big established ones, but you work with the up and coming ones as well.
Yeah.
I think you should talk about how we've been using it. There's a lot of really good client examples, and there's some interesting things that some of these studios are doing.
Cool. I can start with what we're doing,
good.
When we started this company 6 years ago, and we'd have investors be like, "Hey, are you guys Web3? Are you doing Web3?"
Of course.
And our answer was no, but we do deep learning and machine learning, and I was really allergic to the term AI even back then because now we talk now colloquially AI means machine learning and deep learning. So AI. Back then, what we actually meant by AI was a general AI, a general intelligence. And by that measure, worms, depending on the worm, have anywhere from 300 to 1,000 neurons or whatever. And they're generally, broadly, more intelligent than the AIs we have today still. General intelligence is hard. General intelligence is very hard. It's the same reason why like ChatGPT fails actual medical exams and things like that. So, I think to start backwards, like I forget who it was at ChatGPT, but it's like, yeah, we scraped the internet and we're selling it back to you at $20 a month or something like that. But what we saw back then was a big problem in the medical industry and in the clinical psychology industry, which was fundamentally psychological assessment, which to me, I don't know why this is obvious, but it's not obvious to everyone else. I think one of the most fundamental important things as human beings is know thyself. Like, we have to understand who we are so we can be a force on our reality. And that's effectively, when I was a psychotherapist, the consequence of mental health issues. People are struggling with understanding their brains, understanding their mental health states. And because they're struggling with who they are, there's cognitive dissonance, they're stuck, they're not doing well, and then so they seek help. And then we use diagnostic tools like the MMPI, which is like 500 questions, to 1980s style, try and figure out, is this schizotypal personality disorder? Is it depression? Is it ADHD? What is it? And the best tools that I had access to as a clinician, these things are like, the best stuff is like 85%, accurate. And if you think of the medical industry, if someone's like, hey, there's a 15% chance that the surgery we're doing, we actually don't need to do. Like, that's a big deal. And that's good. That's good for like clinical psych. Like, a lot of stuff is like 30%. Like, there's a 30% chance. And in medical terms, that's to me just unacceptable. If something is like, you're giving somebody a medication for potentially the rest of their life, and there's a 30% chance that that's due to error, not okay. So I said, well, what can we do? We need to allow product companies to better understand each other, et cetera. And so there's the AI that we work in two levels of ML and deep learning. One is just straight up assessments, which computerized adaptive testing is actually one of the oldest examples of machine learning. David Weiss, professor at the University of Minnesota, still alive, he's like 86. He invented computerized adaptive testing, machine learning, AKA AI. And I get like, I've had a lot of investor bros explain AI to me, which is really fun. And when we take in like university entrance exams like ACT, SAT in America, that's what that is. It's adaptive computerized testing. That is, quote unquote, an example of AI. It's learning about you as you're taking the questions. So Solsten's been focused on developing the world's largest and most robust adaptive psychological assessment. There's only one other example that we've seen or know of, and it's at the Mayo Clinic that's used. Our assessment runs off of like 10 supercomputers. It takes a lot of computing power. So it's learning about you as you're answering these questions. And people think like, oh, isn't that just like ChatGPT? Well, the difference is the things that it's sending you are validated psychometric items. And a big thing is this thing called accuracy and validity and reliability. So how valid, how reliable. And so like a good example of that is, when you ask the question like, hey, how happy are you with this player experience? And like some researchers like, yeah, I'm a great survey designer. And I asked them like, what's your construct validity and reliability scores for that question? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, do you think that's a responsible question? Like, what do you mean? And I'm like, okay, here's what we know about that question. When you ask that question, so if you compare it to previous existing really valid assessments, it doesn't match up to happiness at all. It actually has more in common with indulgence. So when we look at that as a trait construct, what you're actually measuring more is how indulging was this game for you? Okay, is indulgence helpful with retention? Does it correlate with retention? No, it actually doesn't. It correlates with early novelty and maybe some early gameplay. So the question you're asking isn't actually useful to the game team in the beginning. Also, it's terrible reliability, meaning if I ask you that question now and a week from now, happiness goes up and down. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier with engagement. If a person's really engaged in your game, they'll be pissed too. Because they care. So if a new feature came out, like talk to like Eve Online, they were talking yesterday at the, and he was saying like our players get like intense when we release some new feature stuff. And it's because they care. It's because they like really care about the experience. So if you ask that player in that moment, how happy are you playing the game? They're like 0, but they might be one of the top spenders who's played your game for 20 years, who got married, on Eve Online or something like that. And so So the thing is, what we developed is all these assessment questions that really validly, and what's nice is we've done this across 125 different countries. It's the broadest example of that. So that's one example of machine learning that we do. The other is when we take in play data from the game, we structure that data. So one of the things Solsten's doing is we're building out the cognitive layer of the internet using AI. So, you in this game, for example, your base got destroyed. Is that predictive of resilience or not? We can cross-reference that against our assessment. We take a small sample and we say, in this game, that matches up with resilience for this type of person. If the person has low levels of openness, it actually doesn't. And then we go to another game and it has nothing to do with resilience, for example. So we're able to use the entire world of play to train psychological prediction. And that's the thing that the internet doesn't have today. There's no cognitive layer or psychological layer to the internet. There's only a behavioral layer. So what people did. And what we did is what we did. It's not what we're going to do. Our psychology is a much better predictor of what we will do. So if you think of someone throws a snowball and hits a guy in a park, and it hits the guy and it spreads out to like 5 other people around them. And they all get hit with snow, and it's this kid that threw it. Well, one person maybe gets angry, one person gets excited and starts throwing snowballs back, one person's laughing. Like all these people just had the same behavioral experience of getting hit by a snowball with a kid, but all of them might have had really different emotions or reactions because of their personality. It's because of who they are. So we're literally the AI of human understanding. And so you can think of it as and I think, if you've ever seen or read the book Ender's Game, where he's playing the game and it's understanding his psychology and where he should go into flight school, or the Sorting Hat and Harry Potter, that's how our model is continuously learning how to predict enduring psychological attributes. And so there's this AI of these large language models, that's a whole different world than the world that we're in. And people think that is AI, that's what AI is. All AI is, it's a unique data set that you might have, and then you create a learning model, whether it's supervised or it's a reinforcement learning model or whatever it is. You create learning models around these things, and to your point, it's efficiency. And one of the problems with efficiency is boring though too. So I think I've said this before, but the most efficient version of Lord of the Rings is they need to destroy a ring, and so they go to this volcano and throw it in and it's done. Tolkien would have never been known if that was the problem with AI. So now what is Solsten gonna allow for? We're gonna allow for clinicians, developers, designers, everyone in the world is gonna be able to snap their fingers and know who they're creating stuff for, which is so cool. So we made a lot of efficiencies on that, but it's still boring without the creators. So we're gonna have more content, whether it's these image learning models that can produce new creatives. 95% of human cognition and what we do is synthesization. We're synthesizing things. But then the other 5% we're generating. AI can't generate. It's not generative yet. So anyone that tells you that it's taking all the past stuff, so we're human beings where there's going to be a massive market for people is in the generation part. So divergent thinking skills, back to our Apple logo, put the Apple logos in your room, I don't know. But like the ability to synthesize information quickly and then generate from it. So now I can use Solsten to quickly synthesize who and why. And then I can use all these other platforms we had a customer, for example, use Midjourney to create multiple different creatives for their game. They're thinking of what theme should we use, what art style. And they did it off of the psychological data that we had that, you just talked to, one of the biggest consulting firms out there. I don't know if we can drop that yet.
Yeah, we probably can.
Okay, so BCG, and they're even if we wanted to try to hire all the experts to do what Solsten did manually, it's years and millions of dollars just for one project, and we can do that in the snap of our fingers at a level that we can show the validity, the reliability, all these things that we can literally show you how good it is. And so the ability to do that quickly, there's a huge efficiency in understanding who, and that's back to the resonance factor. You can't create resonance if you don't know who. And then all the what's, like here's creatives, here's generative levels, here's narrative models that I can use with like ChatGPT or things like that. And now I'm matching Solsten data. So we're like the who of AI, and a lot of these things are the what of AI. And what happens in between things like narrative models and Midjourney and us is resonance. Resonance is what gets created between the two of us. But what actually is needed in between all these models that are synthesizing is a human to generate. And so when a human can synthesize, like for example, Vulcan did this with Harmony Games. He looked at all these different creatives, and he used to be the head of data science at Machine Zone. So he's data guy.
Vulcan Audits.
Sorry?
What's his name?
Vulcan Edis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's now CEO of a puzzle gaming company.
Yeah. So this is the case I'm talking about. So they used us for this. So they generate a bunch of stuff using Midjourney. They do resonance testing with us because we have all the audience data, and they actually can see, the different personas, and they know, hey, persona 1 and 2, they really resonate with this creative. They don't resonate with these creatives or these themes or these art styles or these features for that matter. And then they know, like, okay, this is our main audience, so we're going to go for these. So it literally allows you to synthesize information much faster. Now, where the generative part comes is the artist, the designer, taking that information and going, what's new? What's interesting? What could the AI not do? Like we can't, for example, we can look in our data, we can say, I think there might be a new trait here, like that wasn't previously defined. That's interesting, but it takes a human being to also generate what that might be. And then we can put it back into our model. So that's the supervised learning aspect of all this. So I don't know if you want to...
Harmony Games is a great example. And in similar vein, Cosmic Lounge, puzzle studio
out of Helsinki.
Exactly, yeah. So Tomi, the CEO and co-founder there, he was speaking at RovioCon yesterday, and this big AI track, and I think it was the room that was the fullest out of the different tracks. Like, it was huge. Clearly, people are interested. And he talked about a lot of really, really interesting things, what they're doing. And I think what's cool about this is a 20-person studio now. He raised about like 4.5 million or something like that in funding. So they're still very, very early and fairly small. But they've leveraged, things like Midjourney. It's a very similar case where they have Solsten, they use Midjourney, they did the same, creative art style generational part. They have 3 artists. They do the really divergent thinking, as you said. So they follow that to the T. I think the numbers that he was mentioning is that his artists are saying they're about 40% more efficient overall, which is great because it frees their time up to do the things that they are uniquely capable of doing, that is going to give them an edge even more. So it's not the AI that's giving them the edge necessarily. It's the AI that's freeing them up to be more creative and more unique about how they're going to tap into the audience that they want to be after. And they took it to a whole nother level, which I'd never heard of to that extent. They build what's called I think they called it the puzzle engine, where how they are generating the levels, the art style, the flow of all of it in a system that they've built, where effectively, without having to write any code, the system does it all for them. So it's almost like they're dragging and dropping different patterns with defined rules, and all of a sudden they're able to, within a fraction of the time, generate thousands of levels in different variations with different decision trees, how they would want it. So their point is we're able to test so many different variations of what we're thinking about in a fraction of the time to then see what works, so that we're not quote unquote wasting our efforts on one direction and going down really, 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 really far, and then having to backpedal and go, well, what is that other direction that we may want to pursue here? So it was really, really interesting. And I think, the efficiency gains that he was talking, 40% is a lot.
Yeah.
If you think of it, big companies, yes, but for a 20-person team, that early, funding is a finite resource to an extent.
I keep raising the efficiency as a point of an AI because ultimately I see that as being the competitive advantage, because a lot of times when the startups get funded and they look up to, let's say, Blizzards of the world, and they're like, we want to be the next Blizzard. Okay. All right. That's a great vision. But then they start competing in the way that Blizzard is competing. They start hiring the people who would like to work at Blizzard, but they are not working, so they're going to work for you, but they're going to try to work like the people at Blizzard. So what is your competitive advantage? You are much smaller. You have, like, I mean, you can't even compare. Yep. Like you're worse in everything, but that you're trying to do exactly what the other company is doing. And I think that is ludicrous from a business perspective, and that's why this sort of these type of increases. It also talks about like what kind of a people you need to be hiring to your startup. You need to be hiring artists that are very interested in AI, to see it as a tool instead of seeing it as an opponent, as something that that is a risk for you and your whole craft and your being and who you. And so that's why these AI conversations are, for me, they feel very fundamental, and they feel also something that established companies are going to have a lot of trouble with, because they have hired certain people with a very certain fixed mindset where they will see AI as something that breaks the status quo, can cause layoffs, which is like the at every word of every person right now. And so they're going to be against the AI, which is going to give the smaller companies that are being set up from this perspective, who are smart, who are trying to compete with their strengths and not with their weaknesses, a competitive edge.
Yeah, it comes full circle. Change management, cognitive load, and that's what if you create those efficiencies, well, what is the real thing that's happening? Like everyone's tried to do a creative task in the evening. And if you have kids, if you have a family, if you have a job, it's like good luck. Your cognitive load's too high at that point in the evening. You got to go to bed. Like you got to have a drink, you got whatever, we got to work out. So if you look at those efficiencies, and now instead of, 5%, it's maybe 15% of your day is generative. That's interesting, because now that human being can go think of new ideas based on really good synthesization. And so like what, Tommy's doing, where Solsten really fits in here is we're actually the AI of resonance. So you generate a bunch of levels, you generate a bunch of creatives, you generate a bunch of things. That doesn't mean that the person's going to care, especially if they're generated off of models of what was. We have to create what will be. Our job as builders, as entrepreneurs, is to understand where markets and audiences are going and meet them there, not to create what they already had. Yeah. And in order to meet them there, you need to synthesize really, really well and then create off of that. So I think that's the role that AI will play. Like if I think of adaptive levels, adaptive sort of in game environments, even some things as simple as player matching, like with us, like that's another example where we do machine learning. Is we're literally able to see these are the psychological traits that are causing matches not to work. These are the psychological traits that are causing matches to work. We have an integration with Excelbyte where we can literally see this data, and then like, okay, cool. It's constantly learning based on your game, based on your environment, that people who are like this match really well with people who are like that, which could be different in another game environment. So imagine you're a game designer, like, oh yeah, I know that people who are like super extroverted and really motivated by fearlessness, they match really well with people that are like collaborative. Sure, maybe in your environment they did, but in a new environment that might not be true. And so the AI of resonance is important because those team dynamics can change when environments change. So people, places, and things are what a lot of AIs are generating right now. And what we're generating is how they fit back to the actual audience or the person. And so that's where we believe like the future of AI and who's going to win there is who has the most unique data sets. Like anyone can go do another ChatGPT because you can scrape the internet and you can have a ChatGPT competitor. Solsten has the largest psychological data set in the entire world right now. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I think the Finnish government had it because every person they sent to the military had to go through psychological evaluation, and they kept those. But so we're at a point where we have that. It's a unique data set. And think of like cancer detection models, for example. So you go to Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. How many different imaging studies have they done, and what's logged there? What data do they have there? It's gonna be really interesting AI models that can be trained off of that ChatGPT isn't set up to do. And so I think there's a really interesting future with asking yourself as a game developer, if you're saying, we do AI, well, what does that mean? Does that mean you're hooking into Solsten, you're hooking into Midjourney, you're hooking into chat? That's not, no, we're doing the AI. Like, you're hooking into it. But if you are a game developer, you can absolutely generate your own ML systems. So ask yourself, like, hey, in our game, what's a unique data set that's in our game that doesn't exist in other games? And you can build models around that are really interesting. So I think that's like a lot of these games like Everywhere and, the mainframe and like, I think there's gonna be a lot of interesting stuff that happens because the worlds are so big where they'll have unique data. And we think of like, economic data, like look at Robinhood. How do they make their money? Well, they sell a lot of that data back to financial institutions. Think about what you could do as a game developer where you have really interesting economic models. You can go sell that back to a lot of different types of companies. So I do think there's going to be way more revenue models in gaming than people realize right now. Yeah, because of AI.
Yeah, it's interesting when you bring it back to the connection to IP and maybe bigger brands and where all of this is going to go. When you talk to the executives at Adidas, or Adidas, as I should probably say, true to form, Adidas, they've been staying away from video gaming per se a little bit because they said over the last years the quality hasn't been there for them to go full on with their brand and what they want out of it. And they're saying now they're starting to see that experiences are becoming better and better so they could actually see a fit with their brand and what they're trying to do with their community. And when you talk to leadership there, and I said, well, what's your guys' vision for video games? Video games are our wholesale. And what they're thinking about, to your point on revenue models, is, well, we want the video games, we want to monetize what is Adidas in the video games too. So we can have the blockchain or Web3 conversation, but we don't even have to go there. It's just every time, and this is a really good example, take the FIFA franchise that EA had for the longest time. Now it's called what? FUC or something like that. So when Real Madrid is in those games, and they have been for decades, and Adidas is that's the kit that they're wearing. So Adidas pays Real Madrid millions of dollars a year, like hundreds of millions, because they want them to wear those jerseys. So Adidas makes money every time you and I or people in Spain or wherever in the world buy a physical jersey. Yeah. They make zero money right now when that's shown in the game, when people equip a player in FIFA or in these other games with an Adidas kit. But it's literally exactly the same IP. It's exactly the same design. It comes from the people made in Bavaria. It's exactly the same thing. It is just the digital version of what you can buy in a store. Yeah. And they make zero money off of that. So what they're thinking about and what they're looking to is game development partners and actually game developers and studios who are really open to exploring revenue models where they say like, hey, we're going to go to the people that understand that we're bringing extremely valuable IP that elevate the overall experience that you're making for players here, and we absolutely should be monetizing our IP. So the more players or developers are open to exploring those pathways, there's a lot of money to be made and those monetization models currently don't exist in that form.
Yeah, like Mythical's starting to explore them.
They're starting to explore them, yeah.
But yeah, and I think that's where, and they've created the tech on the back end to do it too. Like people like in that conference yesterday, they're like, wait, those are NFTs? Yeah. How are they doing that? And the whole conference, the whole day on the future of gaming was literally about the future of gaming, and it was excluding that the future they're talking about you can download right now. Yeah. And I'm like, you guys, this is silly.
The future present.
Yeah, anyway. Yeah. I think that's
we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
I'm going to end up with one quote, with your quote. I'm going to quote you, actually. And that is just to summarize what Solsten does. Quote, it answers to the question, who are we creating for? That's essentially how I would summarize the platform.
Yeah.
And I think that is also an important quote because that is the answer to how do you make new products.
Yep.
Is you have to start with who are you creating them for now, instead of just throwing spaghetti on the wall and finding high IPMs, low CPIs, great ROASs and whatnot. Marketability is not enough. You got to have everything. We're back in the square one.
Yep. Nailed it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank
That was
you.
awesome.
And thanks everybody for listening.